Secret Doctrine, Part 4, The Tree, the Serpent, and Crocodile Worship. This is taken from Volume 1, Section 10, and I've linked the PDF in the description box below. Quote, "Object of horror or of adoration, men have for the serpent an implacable hatred, or prostrate themselves before its genius. Lie calls it, prudence claims it, envy carries it in its heart, and eloquence on its caduceus. In hell it arms the whip of furies, in heaven eternity makes of it its symbol." End quote. Quoted by de Chateaubriand. The Ophites asserted that there were several kinds of genii, from God to man, that the relative superiority of these was ruled by the degree of light that was accorded to each, and they maintained that the serpent had to be constantly called upon and to be thanked for the signal service that it had rendered humanity. For it taught Adam that if he ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he would raise his being immensely by learning and wisdom he would thus acquire, and such was the exoteric reason given. It is easy to see whence the primal idea of this dual, Janus-like character of the serpent came, the good and the bad. This symbol is one of the most ancient, because the reptile preceded the bird, and the bird the mammal. Thence the belief, or rather the superstition, of the savage tribes, who think that the souls of their ancestors live under this form, and the general association of the serpent with the tree. The legends about the various things that it represents are numberless, but, as most of them are allegorical, they have now passed into the class of fables based on ignorance and dark superstition. For instance, when Philostratus narrates that the natives of India and Arabia fed on the heart and the liver of serpents in order to learn the language of all the animals, the serpent being credited with that faculty, he certainly never meant his words to be accepted literally. As will be found more than once as we proceed, the quote serpent, end quote, and quote dragon, end quote, were the names given to the quote wise ones, end quote, the initiated adepts of the olden times. It was their wisdom and their learning that were devoured and assimilated by their followers, whence the allegory. When the Scandinavian Sigurd is fabled to have roasted the heart of Fafnir, the dragon, whom he had slain, becoming thereby the wisest of men, it meant the same thing. Sigurd had become learned in the runes and magical charms. He had received the quote word, end quote, from an initiate of that name, or from a sorcerer, after which the latter died, as many do after quote passing the word, end quote. Epiphanius let out a secret of the Gnostics while trying to expose their heresies. The Gnostic Ophites, he says, quote, had a reason for honoring the serpent. It was because he taught primeval men the mysteries, end quote. Verily so, but they did not have Adam and Eve in the garden in their minds when teaching this dogma, but simply that which is stated above. The Nagas of the Hindu and Tibetan adepts were human Nagas, serpents, not reptiles. Moreover, the serpent has ever been the type of consecutive or serial rejuvenation of immortality and of time. The numerous and extremely interesting readings the interpretations and facts about serpent worship given in, quote, the natural genesis, end quote, are very ingenious and scientifically correct. But they are far from covering the whole of the meanings implied. They divulge only the astronomical and physiological mysteries, with the addition of some cosmic phenomenon. On the lowest plane of materiality, the serpent was, no doubt, the degradation of the symbol. It was, quote, the great mystery in the mysteries, end quote, and was very likely, quote, adopted as a type of feminine pubescence on account of its sloughing and self-renewal, end quote. It was so, however, only with regard to mysteries concerning terrestrial animal life. For as symbol of, quote, reclothing and rebirth in the universal mysteries, end quote, its, quote, final phase, end quote, or we rather say, its incipient and culminating phases, they were not of this plane. They were generated in the pure realm of ideal light, and having accomplished the round of the whole cycle of adaptations and symbolism, the, quote, mysteries, end quote, returned whence they had come, into the essence of immaterial causality. They belong to the highest gnosis. Surely this could have never obtained its name and fame solely on the account of its penetration into physiological and especially feminine functions. As a symbol, the serpent had as many aspects and occult meanings as the tree itself, the, quote, tree of life, end quote, with which it was emblematically and almost indissolubly connected. Whether viewed as a metaphysical or physical symbol, the tree and serpent jointly or separately have never been so degraded by antiquity as they are now. In this our age of the breaking of idols, not for truth's sake, but to glorify the most gross matter. The revelations and interpretations in, quote, the rivers of life, end quote, would have astounded the worshippers of the tree and serpent in the days of the archaic Chaldean and Egyptian wisdom. And even the early Sevas would have recoiled in horror at the theories and suggestions of the author of the said work. Quote, the notion of Payne Knight and Inman that the cross or the tau is simply a copy of the male organs in a triadic form is radically false, end quote, writes Mr. Gerald Massey, who proves what he says. But this is a statement that could just be as easily applied to almost all modern interpretations of ancient symbols. Quote, the natural genesis, end quote, a monumental work of research and thought, the most complete on that subject that has ever been published, covering as it does a wider field, and explaining much more than all the symbologists who have hitherto written, does not yet go beyond the, quote, psychotheistic, end quote, stage of ancient thought. Nor were Payne Knight and Inman altogether wrong, except in entirely failing to see that their interpretations of, quote, the tree of life, end quote, as the cross and phallus, fitted the symbol and approximated it, only on its lowest and last stage of the evolutionary development of the idea of the giver of life. It was the last and the grossest physical transformation of nature in animal, insect, bird, and even plant, for by creative magnetism in the form of the attraction of the contraries, or sexual polarization, acts in the constitution of reptile and bird as it does in that of man. Moreover, the modern symbologists and Orientalists, from first to last, being ignorant of the real mysteries revealed by occultism, can see only this last stage. But if they are told that this mode of procreation, which the whole world of being has now in common on this earth, is but a passing phase, just a physical means of furnishing the conditions to and producing the phenomenon of life, which will alter with this and disappear with the next root race, they would laugh at such a superstitious and unscientific idea. But the most learned occultists assert this because they know it. The universe of living beings, of all those which procreate their species, is the living witness to the various modes of procreation in the evolution of animal and human species and all races. And the naturalist ought to sense this truth intuitionally, even though he is yet unable to demonstrate it. And how could he, indeed, with the present modes of thought? The landmarks of the archaic history of the past are few and scarce, and those that men of science come across are mistaken for finger-posts of our little error. Even so-called, quote, universal, end quote, question mark, history embraces but a tiny field in the almost boundless space of the unexplored regions of our latest, this fifth root race. Hence, every fresh signpost, every new glyph of the hoary or dark and cold past that is discovered is added to the old stock of information, to be interpreted on the same pre-existing conceptions and without any references to the special cycle of thought which that particular glyph may belong to. Oh, how can truth ever come to light if this method is never changed? Thus, in the beginning of their joint existence, as a glyph of immortal being, the tree and serpent were divine imagery, truly. The tree was reversed, and its roots were generated in heaven, and grew out of the rootless root of all being. Its trunk grew and developed, crossing the plains of the pleroma. It shot out crossways, its luxuriant branches first on the plane of hardly differentiated matter, and then downward till they touched the terrestrial plane. Thus, the Asvata, tree of life and being, whose destruction alone leads to immortality, is said in the Bhagavad Gita to grow with its roots above and its branches below, in chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita. Its roots represent the supreme being, or first cause, the Logos. But one has to go beyond those roots to unite oneself with Krishna, who, says Arjuna, is, quote, greater than Brahman, and first cause, the indestructible, that which is, and which is not, and what is beyond them both, end quote. Its boughs are Hiranyagarbha, Brahma or Brahman in its highest manifestations. Say Sridhara and Masuadana, the highest Dihan Kohans or Devas. The Vedas are its leaves. He only who goes beyond the roots shall never return, i.e., shall reincarnate no more during this, quote, age, end quote, of Brahma. It is only when its pure boughs had touched the terrestrial mud of the Garden of Eden, our Adamic race, that this tree got soiled by the contact and lost in its pristine purity, and that the serpent of the seven-headed dragons, eternity, the heaven-born Logos, was finally degraded. In days of old, of the divine dynasties on earth, the now dreaded reptile was regarded as the first beam of light that radiated from the abyss of the divine mystery. Various were the forms which it was made to assume, and numerous the natural symbols adapted to it, as it crossed aeons of time, as from infinite time itself, Kala, it fell into the space and time evolved out of human speculation. These forms were cosmic and astronomical, theistic and pantheistic, abstract and concrete. They became in turn the polar dragon and the Southern Cross, the Alpha Draconis of the pyramid, and the Hindu-Buddhist dragon, which ever threatens, yet never swallows the sun during its eclipse. Until then the tree remained evergreen, for it was sprinkled by the waters of life, the great dragon, ever divine, so long as it was kept within the precincts of the sidereal fields. But the tree grew, and its lower boughs touched at last the infernal regions, our earth. Then the great serpent, Nidhogg, who devours the corpses of the evildoers in the, quote, hall of misery, end quote, which is human life, so soon as they are plunged into Hewigumire, the roaring cauldron of human passions, gnawed the world tree. The worms of materiality covered the once healthy and mighty roots, and are now ascending higher and higher along the trunk, while the Midgard snake, coiled at the bottom of the seas, encircles the earth, and through its venomous breath makes her powerless to defend herself. They are all seven-headed, the dragons and serpents of iniquity, quote, one head for each race, and every head with 7 hairs on it, end quote, as the allegory has it. Aye, from Ananta, the serpent of eternity, which carries Vishnu through the Manvantara, from the original primordial Sesha, whose 7 heads become, are, quote, 1,000 heads, end quote, in the Puranic fancy, down to the 7-headed Akkadian serpent. This typifies the 7 principles throughout nature and man, the highest or the middle head being the 7th. It is not of the Mosaic Jewish Sabbath that Philo speaks in his creation of the world, when he says that the world was completed, quote, according to the perfect nature of the number 6, end quote. For, quote, when that reason, or nous, which is wholly in accordance with the number 7, has entered the soul rather than the living body, the number 6 is thus arrested in all the mortal things which the number makes, end quote. And again, quote, number 7 is the festival day of all the earth, the birthday of the world. I know not whether anyone would be able to celebrate the number 7 in adequate terms, end quote. The author of the Natural Genesis, Gerald Massey, thinks that, quote, the septenary of stars seen in the Great Bear and the 7-headed dragon furnished a visible origin for the symbolic 7 of time above. The goddesses of the 7 stars, he adds, quote, was the mother of time, as Kep, whence Kepti and Septi, for the 2 times and number 7, end quote. So this is the star of the 7 by name, Svek, or Kronos. The son of the goddess has the name of 7, or 7th. And so has Sefek Abu, who builds the house on high, as wisdom, Sophia, built hers with 7 pillars. The primary chronotypes were 7, and thus the beginning of time in heaven is based on the number and the name 7 on account of the starry demonstrators. And the 7 stars, as they turned round annually, kept pointing, as it were, with the forefinger of the right hand, and describing a circle in the upper and lower heaven. The number 7 naturally suggested a measure by 7 that led to what may be termed as sevening, and to the marking and mapping out of the circle in 7 corresponding divisions, which were assigned to the 7 great constellations, and thus was formed the celestial heptonymus of Egypt in the heavens. When the stellar heptonymus was broke up and divided into 4 quarters, it was multiplied by 4, and the 28 signs took the place of the primary 7 constellations. The lunar zodiac, or 28 days, being the result. Quote, in the Chinese arrangements, the 4 sevens are given to 4 genii that preside over the 4 cardinal points, end quote. In Chinese Buddhism and esotericism, the genii are represented by 4 dragons, the quote, Maharajas, end quote, of the stanzas. Quote, the 7 northern constellations make up the Black Warrior. The 7 eastern, Chinese autumn, constitute the White Tiger. The 7 southern are the Vermilion Bird, and the 7 western, called vernal, are the Azure Dragon. Each of these 4 spirits presides over its heptonymus during 1 lunar week. The genitive of the first heptonymus, Typhon of the 7 stars, now took a lunar character. In this phase, we find the goddess Sefek, whose name signifies number 7, and is the feminine word, or logos, in place of the mother of time, who is the earlier word, as goddess of the 7 stars, end quote. You can find that listed in the Natural Genesis by Gerald Massey, Volume 2, page 313, listed under the section Typology of Time. The author, Gerald Massey, shows that it was the goddess of the Great Bear and Mother of Time who was in Egypt from the earliest times, the quote, living word, end quote, and that quote, Svek Kronos, whose type was the crocodile dragon, the pre-planetary form of Saturn, was called her son and her consort. He was her word logos, end quote. The above is quite plain, but it was not the knowledge of astronomy only that led the ancients to the process of sevening. The primal cause goes far deeper and will be explained in its place. The above quotations, or the previous quotations, are no discretions. They are brought forward as showing a. the reason why a full initiate was called a quote dragon, or snake, or a naga, end quote, and b. that our septenary division was used by the priests of the earliest dynasties in Egypt for the same reason and on the same basis as by us. This, however, will need further elucidation. which we will delve into in the second part of tree, serpent, and crocodile worship. This was just too much to fit all in one 20 or 30 minute video, so I had to split this specific section up into two. So that's it. To be continued in the next video. Please make sure that you have your notifications on so you don't miss anything, and help out the YouTube algorithms. Give the video a like, leave a small comment below, share on your own social media platforms, and as always, love yourselves and love each other unconditionally. Until the next time, peace.